If you've ever seen videos like this about Stoicism just circulating around YouTube with the AI generated thumbnails, you probably think that Stoicism is all about just being tough, like this amalgamation of being tough and emotionally numb to any outside event or suffering completely. But that really wasn't the case when we look at the history and the origins of Stoicism back in 300 BCE. Okay? So let me explain to you how Stoicism came to be and what we can really learn about Stoicism and its practices in ancient Greece. Okay, so let's go back to who we call Zeno of Citium. This person, named Zeno of Citium, was basically the first ever philosopher, the first ever Stoic philosopher that has ever came to be. And he basically founded Stoicism in Athens, Greece, in 300 BCE. Okay? If we're going to try to trace the name of the philosophy, Stoicism, it came from the ancient Greek stoa, which basically meant porch. Okay? And Stoicism was named after this stoa. Okay? Because the former Stoics, the original Stoic philosophers, always came and met each other and held meetings in the what we call the Stoa Poikile. And that place was basically just this. Okay? There were a lot of philosophers, Stoic philosophers, that are still prominent to this day. Like, for example, if you think about Stoicism as a whole, you would think about the first thing that will probably come to your mind is Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, okay? But mainly Marcus Aurelius, because he was really the one who put Stoicism on the mainstream media, okay? And made it and popularized the whole philosophy. But let's try to get a misconception out of the way about Stoicism as a philosophy, okay? Stoicism does not advocate for being emotionally Stoicism does not advocate for being emotionally numb or just not feeling emotions at all, okay? Stoicism's very main objective and its ultimate goal is what we call in ancient Greece eudaimonia. And what does eudaimonia mean? It basically just means that the whole point of Stoicism is to increase human flourishing. Okay? The whole point of Stoicism is to increase human flourishing, to spread human flourishing, and to basically just make everyone happy through a series of practices that the Stoics basically invented, okay? So Stoicism, they ground their beliefs in these fundamental principles that we're going to be sharing with you right now. And first, that is logic, okay? So if you think about logic, okay, you're probably thinking about arguments, okay? Because logic is primarily used in arguments. And logic is also used for clear thinking. The Stoics believed that in order to have eudaimonia, in order to have human flourishing and happiness and everlasting happiness, it's through clear thinking using logic. Okay? Second principle that they grounded their beliefs in is physics. Okay? When you think about physics, you probably think about the physics subject. You probably think about quantum mechanics, astronomy. But the physics that they had back then, I would say, is much more fundamental. It's much more basic than what we have now, and they basically just have this essential idea of physics as grounding their beliefs to reality. Okay, to reality. And lastly, the very last principle that they ground their beliefs in, okay, is ethics. You cannot have ethics without logic. Why? Because ethics, basically, they work in frameworks. And obviously, these frameworks have to be guided by justification. And how do you justify things? Through logic. Okay? They ground their beliefs through logic, physics, and ethics. Now let's talk about more of the one of the more prominent philosophers. Ever since philosophy, the Stoic philosophy, has been spreading in Greece, okay? In ancient Greece, Stoic philosophy has been spreading. And as it spread in ancient Greece, it also, over time, came to be at Rome, in ancient Rome. Okay? And this is where we get the, the most prominent three Roman philosophers. I believe they're Roman, that the three of them were Roman. And we have Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, okay? Seneca being the advisor to the Emperor Nero during his time, and Marcus Aurelius being the Roman emperor philosopher, arguably the greatest Stoic philosopher of all time. This is Epictetus. He was basically born a slave, and he created a book. He also created a book about Stoicism, and Seneca also contributed to Stoicism by I believe he also made a school, or have I gotten the two of them mixed up? But the essence of it is that these three have some of the greatest contributions to Stoic philosophy in general. So, if we could look at one of the quotes here, okay, one of the quotes that they have Let's start with Seneca. You live as if you were destined to live forever. No thought of your frailty ever enters your head. You squander time as if you drew from a full and abundant supply. Okay? And he's basically just saying that you're that fundamentally people, okay? Fundamental people think that they have a unlimited amount of time. And this quote is basically just sort of a motivational and inspirational quote that we can delve deeper later on as we continue on. Okay, so now we're headed to the quote of Marcus Aurelius himself. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. Okay, you can take quotes and interpret them in any way you like, but I'm just showing some of the quotes that they have that were very prominent. And we have Epictetus. It's not what happens to you, how you react to it that matters. There was actually a very fascinating story that I heard about Epictetus, and basically he was a slave, right? I mentioned earlier that Epictetus was a slave, and while he was in prison, I believe that his master his master broke his leg. His master broke his leg, and Epictetus basically answered his master to break the other one, the other leg that he has. So I think that was pretty badass. I just think that was pretty badass. Okay, so now that we've uncovered some brief comprehension and understanding, some brief historical context as well of the Stoic philosophy, let's start to talk about the practices that the Stoics basically endeavored. They basically did and practiced for themselves. And the first practice that they have is what we call premeditatio premeditatio malorum, and this translates to premeditation of all evils. Okay, so you can probably get a you could probably deduce what this means. Okay, so you basically in this practice they basically just meditated. They thought about and they visualized all of the negative things that could happen to them, all the consequences of their actions, all of the negative things that could happen to them. Okay, that basically prepared them, and it basically just made them knowledgeable and acknowledge what there is to expect, the worst of the worst. Okay, so that is premeditatio malorum, expecting the worst, or visualizing, imagining the worst to happen. The second practice that the Stoics did was amor fati, was what we call amor fati, which just translates to love of fate. Fundamentally speaking, Stoicism, the Stoics believe that you should accept nature for what it is. And we can talk about the other thing that the Stoics basically did and basically practiced is that we can just discuss this, okay? The dichotomy of control. Stoics did this in order to evaluate what exactly is in their control and not. So we have two columns. The first is what you control. Okay? The things that you can control, and can't control. And it's pretty intuitive in and of itself. You basically just list down what are the things that you can control in any situation, in that situation that you're breathing in or suffering from, and you can also list down what you can control. You try to be as factual as possible with this, and once you try to reflect upon it, you just need to let go of what you can't control. The second column. Okay? So the Stoics believe that you should accept your fate. You should accept the nature. You should accept nature and fate, or whatever fate has for you. You basically just need to endure that, and make the best out of it. And do whatever that is in your control, and let go of what is not in your control. Okay? Follow nature and fate, or fate. Okay? Stoics followed nature or fate. Now the third and last practice, among the many possible practices that the Stoics have done. So we have premeditation malorum, which basically is premeditation of all evils, expecting the worst out of things, out of events, out of people. Two, second practice, more fatty, love of fate, following nature, whatever consequences that may come. Okay? Basically just accepting it. It's full acceptance. And three, third practice that the Stoics have done is what we call, and you probably already know this, memento mori. The third practice that they do is memento mori. A lot of people already know what this means. If you don't, it basically just means remember that you will die. Okay? Memento mori. Now it sounds kind of morbid to think about, but this is one of the many practices the Stoics have done. Okay? In order to achieve what they call eudaimonia, as I've stated earlier. Okay? So that's probably it for this brief introduction to Stoicism, the philosophy of Stoicism. I hope you learned something from this short little clip, short little video. If you did, please consider subscribing. It's free. If you don't wanna, then it's okay. Okay? Thank you for watching.